All right, worlds. We're going to do another video. It's June 3rd, 2022. Happy Holy Friday to all those. All right. So, freeing myself from the bare minimum. Okay. Meaning bare minimum behavior. Meaning that the people in my life tend to do just enough just so you can't say that they're not doing anything, right? Okay. So, looking back on it, my life, my childhood, I grew up in an abusive household, right? My mother suffered abuse for 31 years, like consistently, 31 years straight. My father has, his issues, has his problems. So because of that, I'm used to accepting less, because anything is better than nothing, right? So that's the mentality I always had. Anything is better than nothing. So I'll take a little bit of something opposed to not having anything, right? So as I get older, and now I'm trying to expand my life, I'm realizing that type of mentality isn't gonna get you far, right? Because just accepting anything doesn't really put a value on what you deserve, right? You're not like setting a bar or setting some type of standard for what you deserve. So people will literally come to you with anything. So I'm thinking back now, right, as I'm attempting to heal myself. And one thing I remember my sister always saying to me, she was like, I'm not taking that. Like, certain shit, you can keep it. Because the energy that comes with it, or you give me who it's coming from, I don't even want it. So whatever, forget it, you can keep it. Me, on the other hand, I could never put those type of boundaries down, or never assert myself enough to be like, you know what, you're right. I don't need to take this. Like, I don't want it. It's okay. You can keep it. I don't want that bullshit bare minimum behavior. Like, I just don't. So I remember as a child, my sister would talk shit about my father, who is not her father, right? That's her stepfather. So my older sister, my mother's child from a previous relationship. So she would always be like, your father is a piece of shit, right? And I'd be like, don't talk about my dad like that. My dad isn't a piece of shit, but in all actuality, my dad is a piece of shit. Like, it's the reality. She's calling a spade a spade. So now, as I'm getting older, I have to learn to make these type of discernments, right? And call a spade a spade. My dad, she was a child. So my sister is 9 years older than me. So when I was born, my sister was 7 years old. Or, I'm sorry, when I was born, my sister was 9 years old. So by the time I got, to maybe like 3, 4, my sister was already in her teenage years. So my dad would give her an allowance, right, as a child. Say like maybe he started when she was like 7, because my parents were together before I was born, a couple years or so. So he would start off with a little allowance, and he would give her a jar of pennies. Like, maybe $10 worth of pennies in this jar, or whatever, but he would just give her, like, a jar of pennies. And my sister was saying, like, at first she would take it because to her, in her mind, it was like, it was better than nothing. But then she started to think, like, I'm worth more than a jar of pennies. So I'm not going to keep taking this jar of pennies. And if that's what you feel like I deserve, you could just stop giving it to me, because I don't want it. Smartest thing the girl could have ever, grasped, right? That self-worth, like knowing what you deserve. So she would never take it. And my dad would call her like an ungrateful, B-I-T-C-H. Like, as a child, he would call her an ungrateful. And I would think, like, is she ungrateful? You get me? Like, is she really? Because truthfully, I don't want those jar of pennies. I don't want that shit. And you would never give me a jar of pennies, like, ever. You give me money, and as a child, my dad he had a lot of money. Like he was a foreman, you know, like he was in construction and different things. So he didn't need to have to give, you know, like pennies to her. You know, he could have did more, right? But he was just doing the bare minimum just so that he could say, look, I'm doing something for your child. Forgive me, I'm doing something, like something to hold over my mother's head, like manipulation. That's how I took it, right? So I'm like, you would never give me pennies. Like, you've always given me, you know, bills, 20, 50, 100, and a clip. I never had to worry about, you know, like that type of thing. Not knowing that because of that, right? Now he's making my sister resent me because she always had to have the short end of the stick when it came to certain things. And I didn't. I used to just get it. And I always would be like throwing it in her face, not understanding that this was systematically happening to us, right? Where he was purposely making her feel some type of way by giving her the bare minimum and kind of like putting me on a pedestal, so to speak, and giving me anything that I desired, right? So fast forward years later, now I'm in a relationship. So with my oldest child's father, it was an abusive relationship, just because, like I said, I grew up in an abusive home, so I never really made the distinction between the two of what is healthy and what is unhealthy, right? So I just figured everybody argued, everybody fought. That was just the way of the world, you know, because people weren't perfect. And then as a child, though, when I go to other people's houses, I'm like, damn, why don't they family fight like that? You get me? Like, it's a sense of love here. Like, everybody cares about each other. Everybody is, you get me? Like, I might have y'all little disagreements, but it's never to the extreme that I'm used to seeing in my home, right? So then that made me resentful to other people, because I'm like, these people have a sense of normalcy I've never known. You know, like not waking up to someone screaming to the top of their lungs, you know, to the point where you're either like going through shakes, having nervous breakdowns, or you're like about to pee on yourself because the emotions are so high and you're so young that you can't control it. So I would resent these people, because I'm like, damn, they have a sense of normalcy that I don't have. Like, even if their father isn't necessarily in the home, because I've had friends like that where both their parents weren't together. Some, you know, my one friend, she lived with her father and her stepmom, and then my other friend, she lived with her mom and her stepdad, you know. So not necessarily having both parents in the household, but you still have a sense of normalcy. You know, there's none of the shit that's going on in your house, quote unquote, that's going on in my house. But yet my parents are supposed to be, you know, older. My parents had me in their mid-30s. You know, by the time I was you know, coming up into my school age years, my parents had already been in their careers, so they had money that, you know, typical younger parents didn't have. So they were able to provide a certain stable or a certain level of stability within my life, but at the end of the day, the emotional part was all fucked up, right? So because of it, I almost like became mute to an extent, because I didn't really want to talk and I didn't know how to express the emotions that I was going through. So I just suppressed them. And then, you know, that would just make me, like I said, real angry, bitter, resentful to all those that I felt had a better life to me. So I developed jealousy and envy towards people, right? And everyone would be like, oh, you know, I don't understand. Why is it that, you know, you're so angry? Your life is good, right? Surface-wise, my life was good compared to those who didn't have, right? So my parents had a car. My parents, you know, were able to maintain a place to live all the time, right? So we mostly stayed somewhere forever, right? I lived in one town for 15 years, and then the other town I lived in for 7, you know, and that was like all of my childhood. And then when I got older, I bounced around because I'm not able to keep that same level of stability that my parents was able to maintain. So you know, to the surface, people think, oh, well, you know, this life is perfect. You know, you got older siblings, everybody's successful, you know, everybody's living what society would say a good life. But it's all a fake, right? Because when it comes down to the emotional stuff that no one's dealing with, parents fight constantly. Like, more so than what you would consider to be like enemies. Like, you think they were two people at war, the way these people would consistently go at each other, right? My whole life, consistently go at each other. And for me, as a child growing up, I didn't like my father because I didn't like the stuff that was going on in my house. And I didn't like how my mother, you know, how it would break her spirit a lot of times. You know, because she just didn't understand why she couldn't receive a certain level of love, right? But then I had to look at it when I started to heal myself from hindsight. You know, she was doomed from the beginning. She grew up in an abusive household, so she's seen a lot of things that she quote-unquote thought was normal, and all of that incorporated into her life. So now, years later, after seeing her own mother abused, now she's being abused, right? And because she never broke that cycle of leaving my father and healing from that, now years later, I'm in an abusive relationship, right? And I'm just trying to understand, you know, what needs to be healed within those 3 generations. Right? My grandmother, my mother, myself. So that I can prevent my 4 daughters now, I've got 4 daughters, from walking the same path that we have all walked. So, what I seen with my mother was my mother never left. 31 years of torment, torture, heartache, never left. Said she was gonna leave, he was always back, right? So I noticed with my aunts, my mother's sisters, they left, right? Both of them married into, quote unquote, wasn't, you know, the best relationships. But both of them were able to walk away. My one aunt moved across half New Jersey just to get away from her situation. And then my other aunt, you know, took a long time, just solitude, right? But she didn't date anyone for a long time. But then when they began to get back into relationships, it was just the same cycle of pattern, same type of men, same disrespectful, low vibrational, nothing to offer, you're giving everything, he's giving nothing, bare minimum, emotionally unavailable type of men. So I noticed that part. So I'm like, all right, so what do I need to do different between these? Because you've seen this situation where they left, but it still ended up in the same cycle, right? She stayed, my mother, and the cycle still continued. So what do I need to do to break this cycle, right? So as I'm going through this mentally, and, you know, I'm trying to figure out what would be my best healing options, I realized that the only difference, that the difference between all the situations, or something that could have been done differently within all the situations to yield different results, was that if they just took the time to sit down and heal, right? Because my grandmother, excuse me, ended her last relationship in her mid-50s. Like, you know, maybe like early 50s, mid 40s, right? And then she spent the rest of her days up until she was 90 something years old alone, right? Happy and alone. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to spend 30 years happy and alone. I want to be happy, but I don't necessarily want to be alone. So how do I redirect? So I'm like, okay, one thing that I noticed about my mother, she never picked herself. None of the situations. It was always her picking someone else. Always her wanting to love someone else. Even the men outside of my father, that, she felt a connection to. It was always her putting in all the effort and these men putting in barely nothing. So I'm like, no, that's not going to be me. Then I noticed with my aunt spent a lot of time putting into herself, right? But it was only surface deep. So it was more so the physical parts of it. You're getting your hair done, you're getting your nails done, you're upkeeping yourself, right? The physical, upkeeping yourself. So I'm like, okay, that's one way. But then I also remember my mother always telling me that at one point, the beauty's gonna fade, right? I'm gonna get older, I'm not gonna be as attractive. So where will my substance be? You get me? Because there has to be a level of personality to sustain something, right? Because it's gonna get boring with looks. He's gonna have to have something else to trigger his mind and keep him intrigued. So I'm thinking personality, substance. So then that's when I'm like, you know what? If I could heal those inner parts of me, right, that are a little rugged, a little dark, a little ugly, if I could just take the time to work on those, then I won't need your outside validation. Because that's what you're hoping that I need. You're hoping that I will seek you as refuge, as if you're God. And I'll be damned if any man is going to be my God, right? Because that's just not how it's supposed to be designed. So no, I'm not going to seek you for my outside validation. And what I said to my father and my mother, which was one of her problems, was you have low self-esteem and you're easily influenced. And one thing that I could say I never really had was low self-esteem. I was conceited in my youth, like completely, utterly self-centered. So I don't lack the self-confidence, right? So it has to be something else. They're easily influenced. I'm used to growing up with my father constantly telling me how I'm inadequate, and inadequate is a clean, respectful way to say some of the things that he would say to me and my sister, because we got called all types of inappropriate things that like really stuck on my psyche as I was growing up, because I really started to believe this shit, and then I'm like, that's not me. Like, I don't care. Like, you just want to keep me in a small place, because being in that small place, you feel like you have some type of control. No, bruh. No control. 31 years old now. No control. So I'm like, no. So it's not the lack of confidence. It's the easily influenced. So once you once you stop listening to those outside voices, there's no power. There's no power. And I'll be damned if you think that you're going to force your will upon me as if your will is stronger than mine. No, it's not. Return that shit back to you. Like, no, it's not. My will is stronger. And that's how you have to live. So once one started to understand that, one was like, you know what? I deserve more. So I don't accept any bare minimums. I don't. And not even from my own father, because that was the hardest part to heal, that lack of daddy-daughter relationship that I've been looking for so many years. Wondering why my father never took the time out with me to ever, encourage me or put me where I feel like would be in a better space when it comes to men. Because, your father, your brother, those your uncles, those men in your life when you're young, those are your first impressions of them, right? And I had a really bad impression because I was born into a family where both my parents lost their father very young. My mother lost her father at 11 and my dad lost his father at 21. So there's parts of them that were already missing, right? So because of that, that already stemmed off, to them having like a lower quality, I guess, right, on life. Because it took her a long time, my mother, to really process that. And even I could say at 60 years old, when she eventually passed, she still hadn't quite processed that. It was still suppressed, and it was something that she was not dealing with. My father, on the other hand, it made him have a chip on his shoulder where he felt as if, you know, he has it harder than everyone else. So you always have to try and accommodate his emotions and how he's feeling, you know, because this is something that needs to be compensated for his lack of this, right? So that was already tarnished. Then we go into my uncles, right? Because I have I have a lot of uncles, right? On both sides. Never took the time out on a healthy level, right? To really build a relationship. So I never had that part either. Brothers are older than me, and from a different woman on my father's side. So didn't really grow up in a household with them, so the bond there just isn't. So as a young girl, constantly looking for male validation, always. Conceited as hell, because I was, I was pretty, and people always, like to feed my head. They fed the shit out of my ego. So that was always there. But, just needing validation, not from so much physical, but from an internal, because I just wanted to feel like I was loved. I wanted to feel like I was enough. Okay. So then once you go through heartache and someone breaks your heart, now you hate men. Okay. And one thing from developing that type of resentment is once you finally say, F it, whatever, you gain a sense of confidence now that no one can take from you. Meaning that even if you don't tell me I'm beautiful, I'm still going to be beautiful, because that's not going to change anything. Even if you don't acknowledge me, I'm still something of value. That's not going to change anything. So once one gets those principles, like those key components in your head, where now you know that the validation comes from self, right? Most people won't say the validation comes from self. You'll say the validation comes from the creator. You say the validation comes from God, source, whatever type of spiritual or religious aspect of it. It comes from there. But really the validation, it's the little head in you just saying, you know what? Somebody has to love it. Somebody has to love you. So why not you? And that's where I took from my mother, because my mother always put her energy into everyone else. Like, meaning you could call her at a drop of a hat, or, just anytime, and my mother would always answer the phone, and she'd always be of service for you. But then I noticed, like, when my mother was going through stuff, no one ever bothered to really look out for my mother. It was like certain people would come, but mostly, she was on her own. And I was like, nah. Which is why I was so, like, held back, because my empathic nature is not going to let you think you're going to keep taking from me, and there's not going to be any type of exchange. No, because then I won't deal with you, and I don't have to deal with you, and I've spent a lot of time alone, and so I'm completely okay with solitude. Like, it doesn't bother me. So I was like, that's where I want to get at. I just want to just fully accept myself and give myself energy. And I remember, like, as a child, that was a coping mechanism for me. So when my parents were fighting or whatever bullshit that was going on, I would listen to music, right? And I would put all my focus into shit that made me happy, right? So writing made me happy. Writing poems made me happy. Writing scripts made me happy. Like, expressing myself through some type of creative path made me happy. So I would do that, opposed to focusing on the negative aspects. And because of it, it made me very successful. Not knowing that I was just, following some law of the universe to transmute and transform whatever negative aspects were going on in my life. So once you learn these techniques and now you're able to implement them to make your life successful, everything comes together full circle. Everything starts to make sense. All those pieces of the puzzle fall together. So I just wanted to take a brief moment to, just just express how much one needs to love oneself, know what one deserves, and stop accepting anything less than that. Because every time you accept something less than what the fuck you think or know you deserve, you are teaching people to treat you badly. Learned it firsthand. So, just giving a little bit of encouragement. Excuse the profanity. Okay? Have a lovely day, all. Be well.